The rise of AI, specifically generative AI, has brought about an environment of uncertainty and change. Today, we're going to look at some ways that you can stay informed and try and create some certainty for yourself and an understanding of what's happening in this brave new world that we find ourselves in. This is the Talk to Me PDD podcast. I'm your host, PDD. This is the podcast where we talk about people management, leadership, AI, and its impact on our world, and all things knowledge work. Today, episode 33, we're going to talk about self-directed learning in the world of AI. So we've talked a little bit about self-directed learning in the past couple episodes, how you can figure out your own learning path, what you can go and study and consume on your own to keep up to date and to build a set of skills and knowledge without relying on others to do it. And with any new endeavor, AI is no different. You're going to have to take a baseline and understand where you are. If you have a background in some of these technologies, then maybe you're going to take a different path than if you're more of a generalist or new to it. I'm going to take more of an approach on foundational knowledge, which I think is the most relevant to try and stay up to date with for all of us, even if you are a subject matter expert kind of in the technical side of artificial intelligence these days. So what can you do? Hands-on learning is always a good place to start. You can go and experiment with different tools, try and do different things, see what happens. Most of the public tools now are getting easier and easier to use. There's not a huge amount of barrier to entry, at least on the kind of the consumer side and even somewhat on the enterprise. So go and experiment with different things depending on what domain you find yourself in professionally or otherwise. There may be some domain specific things that you want to go and look at. So getting hands-on is always a good place to start, kind of seeing how things work and what may or may not be useful to you. The next step from there is micro learning, which is pretty popular now. So, bite-sized content that you can consume pretty easily in a busy day. It could be 5 to 10 minutes worth of things. And these are good to introduce ideas. So it is worthwhile to do. You're not going to get to that great a level of depth with it, but it may expose you to some concepts that you hadn't heard of. And I really like to use this to sort of take notes and say, okay, I hadn't heard of this before, or maybe I hadn't thought about this detail, and this is something that I need to go and look into more in detail down the road at some point. So knowing that it's more of a way to collect topics that could be useful for the future, and you'll get a little bit of information, but probably not too much. I also think it's worthwhile to follow mainstream news outlets. And again, you're not going to get a real deep dive into the knowledge there or a real robust analysis of multiple sides of an issue most times. But you're going to kind of see what's popular, what's in the discourse, maybe what various marketing teams or businesses or organizations are trying to get out as a message. And as you get further into sort of your knowledge acquisition and your learning, you can kind of look at these with a critical lens and say, okay, does this match sort of the deeper dive that I've done, or is this something that's sort of being portrayed one way, which may or may not match kind of the detailed information that you've gone and learned. So I think it's worthwhile to keep a track of that just to see where the public discourse is, and also to be able to look at it with a critical eye once you've sort of gotten to a next level of depth in your knowledge of AI and what's really going on. I think sticking with the foundational principles for depth versus getting into specific products makes the most sense for most people. If you have a specific use case where you need to deep dive into a particular area, say you're maybe a developer who's using AI tools for development, maybe that makes sense. But for most of us, having sort of this foundational knowledge at a high level, so not necessarily deeply technical, but just understanding kind of the big picture is the right approach to stay up to date with AI and developments there. And I think that's easier to do than you might think. If you haven't done it before, you may kind of get overwhelmed with all of sort of the technical jargon and things happening there. And there are lots of changes there, but there's ways to consume that can be understood by more of a layperson or an AI generalist as opposed to somebody who's deeply technical there. Last episode, I talked a bit about the specific Azure certifications for AI, the AI 900, and mostly talked about 102 in the last time. I think these are good, and especially the 900 is very foundational. I think that's something that's accessible for most knowledge workers who want to invest some time and go in and study. And you'll learn a lot of these foundational concepts there. And then, for whatever it's worth, you'll sort of have the official blessing of being certified in this area, which isn't the end all and be all, but it shows that you've gone and done some effort and are taking things seriously and have kind of this foundational level of knowledge in AI. So I think those are good. Um, Obviously, those aren't the only AI certifications. Those are the ones that I've done, so I can speak to those. But I'm sure there are other good ones out there that you can do. They're going to force you to kind of learn different things and then have a tangible way that you can demonstrate that you've gone and acquired that knowledge. Um, Whatever you're doing and learning, especially in this area where there is a lot of new developments and changes and uncertainty and some strong opinions and some really strong claims, I think it's worthwhile to try and learn on both sides of some more controversial issues. So, for example, AGI, artificial general intelligence, sometimes talked about as superintelligence, this idea that once we get to a certain level of capability in our generative AI models, that they're going to take off and become more and more intelligent and do things that we could only dream of. Maybe people will never have to work. So that's certainly one side of the argument. There's various papers and books that you can read there. But then there's also some other people on the other side who would argue that the structure of large language models are limited in many senses and it's not possible to achieve AGI with sort of the current structure and even kind of the current compute that what we have. So go explore both of those sides, sort of look at the merits and of either side and come up with your own conclusions about it. Likewise, things with AI safety, right? You can go and look at somebody who's very on one extreme end, like Eliezer Yudkowsky, who is very concerned about sort of the existential risk of AGI and alignment and all those sorts of things, and understand that. And then, he certainly has his critics as well. Similar arguments to the first one, that these things aren't possible, that we need to focus more on current pressing issues, things like environmental impact or bias or things like that. So go and explore, read, listen to people on both sides, and come up with your opinion. I mentioned the environment one. I think that's kind of tricky to get real accurate data on, at least at a macro level. But it's worthwhile reading different perspectives and then also looking in sort of at the more local level where these data centers are being built, trying to understand what's the impact on the local population there. What does this even mean? I've talked about it in some of the past episodes. What is an AI data center? How is that different from a more traditional data center? And then form your opinion on kind of where you think things are with the impact on the environment with current generative AI tools, and also sort of future projections about growth and how that might impact our world and our environment. And kind of last, trying to give some different topics where there's debate on the argument around human augmentation versus automation, how that's going to impact jobs and people's workflows. Do we want AI tools that can automate menial tasks, or does that run the risk of taking away work from too many people? And is that something we want to avoid? Do we want to take a more human-focused approach and design AI tools that are going to augment people and make their existing work better? So debates on both sides for all of these issues, but I think it's really useful to expose yourself to both sides of arguments in the AI space, because there are lots and it's far from decided, at least in my opinion, on many of these things. So now, surprise, surprise, I really like books in the AI space. I think you get to a level of depth that you just don't in other sources. And the argument against this might be, well, things are changing so fast. If I read a book from 2 years ago, is it really going to be that relevant now? In my experience, it is. And a lot of times these concepts have a lot more staying power and have been around for a longer time than you might think, kind of given that generative AI has really only been in the mainstream for a couple of years now. A lot of these concepts have been around a long time. AI research, or the term AI, started in the 50s. So it's been quite a while that these discussions have been happening. even books that I've read that are specific to generative AI and some of the earlier GPT models, um, they still apply today, at least in my opinion. So, being able to understand the history, how this field developed, and again, this is not at a deep technical level, but sort of the philosophy and kind of the thought process around uh, what tools to develop, how to do it, pros and cons. People now talk about, worrying potentially about the negative effects of talking to chatbots about too much. There was a chatbot many years ago called Eliza that used a very simple language model, not even a language model, but a way to sort of rephrase how users talk to it. And that's had similar psychological effects on users that ChatGPT has with some people today. So there's lots that we can learn even from things that are, from quite a bit in the past. Um, Reading about the people involved in leading kind of major AI labs and big tech companies right now and learning about their personalities, I think is really interesting and important. A lot of these designs and sort of how AI is going, that's going to shape the entire global world, is shaped by a few personalities that have certain perspectives, come from certain backgrounds, often are kind of in the same environments together, and you can see how their views and their experiences shape the technology. And I think that's important to understand as we think about how we want AI and how we want technology to serve us, understanding where this design is coming from and why it might have certain features or capabilities or work in a certain way as opposed to another way. Um, Understanding economics in general and the economics of tech and how technology and productivity can either help labor, help workers, or help capital, and how that's happened over time. And again, how do we make decisions there, and what are your perspectives on that? Um, how does technology and how does AI influence our social world? How do things like bias and discrimination that exist in the data that AI systems consume and in our structures in society today, how do those show up in AI and automated systems that are being deployed now? And is that good? Is that bad? What do we want to happen? How do different cultures with different ethics and different values use the same AI systems? Can they apply one value set when they use it, and somebody in a different culture can do a different value set when they use it? So again, interesting topic, good to learn about. A lot of these tools are used in various types of surveillance, and whether that's sort of national security or law enforcement, or in military applications, or even in weapon systems in military applications. It's good to understand and good to get perspective on. And I would encourage you to kind of dive deeply into those topics, because I know in some cases I had a strong reaction for certain types of applications, but then after kind of listening to some people on both sides in that space, evolved my opinion. So they're complicated issues. I think we sometimes know our values and can act in the moment and feel like we're acting in an ethical way. But when we have to encode them and make decisions that may involve life and death or freedom or things like that, it can be more difficult to explicitly encode them and have to make decisions that have harms, for people. And that's sort of the reality is as we go further kind of down the rabbit hole of tech and AI, that if we're going to empower these systems in these types of scenarios, we're going to need to decide how we want them to behave ethically. So all of these things, a lot of different kind of big topics. You're not necessarily going to be able to cover them all in a single book for sure. And depending on how much you want to read, may not get to them all, but pick some, and I think that'll help you kind of think more broadly and deeply about the impact of AI systems. And really, the idea is that you want to separate the reality from the myth, right? What is hype and what is marketing, and what is something that someone is trying to sell versus what is the reality. And sometimes there are AI systems that are sold for a certain thing where it's pretty clear that if you read into it, they're not going to do that well or in the way that a customer might want them to do that. And then there are other systems where they can. So the more informed you can be about sort of those details, the better you're going to be able to separate um, what's real and what can really work, which is going to be important in the long run, versus what's hype and maybe part of a bubble and will burst someday or cause real harm. And we want to avoid that if we can, for sure. Um, so next after books, I would say somewhere kind of in the middle of depth between books at one end and microlearning and headlines at the other. I think podcasts are really good. You're here today, so thank you for that. But there's lots of good sources there, and the advantage there also is it's a little bit more current. Obviously, writing a book, getting it published takes a little bit of time. So even though I see a huge amount of value there, it's not going to be the latest and greatest things coming through. There are a lot of really good ones. Again, I think this is a great opportunity to try and balance your views, even if you're picking two extreme podcasts to listen to in the world of AI. So, for example, New York Times, Hard Fork, which is kind of your typical like AI booster. This is really cool stuff, kind of following along the marketing lines of big AI labs and companies. Like that's a great one to listen to and kind of see what's coming out of that and what their perspective is. Then if you want sort of like a a hard opposite of that, Ed Zitron's Better Offline is totally anti-generative AI and trying to kind of basically shoot holes in sort of all of the different things that are happening and financial things. So you listen to both of those and you're going to have a pretty good perspective on both sides, and then you can kind of figure out for yourself where you think the right balance is. Um, and then lastly, real world experience is really important. Like look around at the work you do, the domain that you're in. If there are AI tools there, are they working for you? Are they not working for you? After you've done sort of some more learning about capabilities, do you see things in your day-to-day or various workflows where you think AI will work or not? And again, there's not a right answer. You don't have to accept somebody else's answer for what they're telling you will work or won't work. But you're probably the one who knows the details of your workflow and kind of your day-to-day the best in a business or an organization that you're in. So take that foundational knowledge, take what you really do day to day and what your business or organization does, and see where there are opportunities there, and then try things and learn from them. I think it's also useful to talk to people in other industries or listen to people in other industries. So I mentioned, AI and coding. That's a big one. Again, there are various perspectives there, but listen to people that are actually, hardcore software engineers running dev teams, doing that work to make a living, and hear their perspective on why or why not they're using these AI tools and how they work or don't work for them, or where they work or where they might fall down into different challenges. And you don't have to be deep in that space, but if you listen to it at a higher level, that's going to give you some more understanding of where it can be successful, and also learn some things that you can translate into other domains. If it fails in a in a certain area in one domain, and understand why, then it's probably going to run into similar challenges in a different domain if it has the same environment and same characteristics. And then just understand that this is all still being decided. It's still unknown. Sometimes it feels like these changes are sort of just coming at us and we don't have any agency in it, but we do. And I think you're seeing people start to, push back in areas where they don't necessarily like where things are going. And there's more debate, which is good because it's not inevitable how this technology evolves and lands in society. And we should feel that we have a voice and we have an opinion. So the more we can be self-educated and understand what's happening, the more informed we can make our opinions to influence what's going to happen. And again, things with values and ethics, these are very personal. So figure out what yours are and how they apply in this situation, and then sort of educate yourself on the foundations. And then I think you're going to have a very strong perspective, regardless of where you come down on it. And I think you can pick a variety of perspectives that are defensible. So just figure out what works for you. And there you go. That's my take on self-directed learning for AI. Get foundational, get deep, read broadly, look at both sides of these arguments, and then make up your mind for yourself. So enjoy. Thanks.